Hello, everyone. My name is always Asma. Welcome to another episode of Tooways to Skin a Cat, a show where we talk career experiences, entrepreneurship, and investments. The main aim is to show that there's more than one way to be successful other than just climbing the corporate ladder. We are live on LinkedIn and YouTube, and a show will be available on podcast by tomorrow. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on that notification bell to get automatically notified when the next episode comes out. If you're joining us live, drop a one in the comments so that we know we're not talking to ourselves, and drop a two in the comments if you're watching the recording. My guest for this week is Clive Kaplan, a chartered accountant and executive coach who helps professionals move to the next level in their careers. He's also the CEO of Green Mind Capital Group. Clive, thanks so much for joining me today.
Esmal, thank you very much for having me on your show. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you.
Let's jump straight in. Tell us your story. Where do you come from? And even outside of work, who is Clive Kaplan? Give us that backstory.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm going to kick off by saying that I'm 70 years old. Okay, and that's quite relevant into the discussion going forward. So I'm a CA, qualified many years ago. I'm not going to even give you the dates, but I've been in the corporate space for about 25 years before I went into this business. At the executive level, that sort of board level, in various forms. I was 15 years. I was with a listed company, a big manufacturing and distribution company, and had a wide, experience, because with big companies, actually, I made up a lot of small companies, and we had, a series of different businesses. So I had a really great opportunity to gain very solid business experience there. And then about 8 years ago, I decided that, with the help of my coach, actually, to go into the coaching business. And I must be honest that, firstly, I'm in my happy space. I mean, this is my calling in life, I feel. I really enjoy it. I'm never working. I'm always enjoying what I do. And it's really great to connect with, especially a lot of young people, because it keeps me in the know. Yeah, we've got a lot of millennials around. People sometimes don't have a lot of good things to say about, which I don't agree with. I think they're particularly interesting and exciting bunch of people. And of course, we are in a very, digital emerging world. So, it's important to keep up to date with that. So I think, and then, sort of the experience that I gained was, operating at the board level and really understanding some of the idiosyncrasies and some of the things that go on. There's one thing that was clear to me is that there's a distinct game going on when one gets into the executive space. And if you know the rules of the game, you'll survive, and if you don't, you'll be subtly shunted out. So I think the work that I do now is, in fact, quite a lot about what I've just said. Okay, it's really learning the rules of the game, learning the type of gameplays that go on, and the protocols and the maneuvering that one needs to do in order to tactically and strategically maneuver one's career. There's one thing that I learned when I got into the executive space is that ultimately it actually is all about me. Okay, and that is a two-edged sword. In that, the first thing to know is that everyone around you is only interested in themselves and not interested in you. And secondly, if you don't look after yourself, nobody's going to look after you. In a manager space, I had this naive belief that the company would look after me or my boss would look after me. Okay, that's an absolute, that's an absolute untruth. It does not happen. Well, certainly in most cases. I'm not going to say in every case. It's about 80% of cases that doesn't happen. So one needs to be fending for oneself, and one is always one out. That's difficult to trust people in that space. But again, it also has its excitement. Of course, it's financially rewarding. And really, when you get into the executive space, the difference is, and I hear that quite interestingly from a lot of people I speak to, it's a strategical place. And that really, if I can just put in the words that I understand it, in the executive space, you run the business. In the manager space, you run the people. And it's a very different experience completely, very exciting, as I say. And as a CA, we are actually trained to be in the executive space. That's where we belong. Okay, anyone short of that, we're really just basically marking time, gatekeeping, especially one's been in, sort of around for about 7 or 8 years. So it's critical when it gets into the executive space. And I need to say that there is a big difference between managers and executives. And one of the things is the pay gap. I need to tell you that. But take that, just don't take that out. The biggest increase you will get in your career is moving from the manager space into the executive space. And that's why it's so important to be in there, because not only is it lucrative, but it's also much more stimulating and much more exciting. In fact, if you're in corporate and you're thinking of leaving, if you haven't been in the executive space, okay, you haven't really had the experience of what it's like to really be, sitting in the bridge in the boat, in the ship. Yeah, so as I say, I speak to a lot of people. I do this kind of work, and find it very stimulating. Every case is basically different, so it's very, very interesting for myself, and hopefully my clients have a similar experience.
And you've been in the chartered accountant space since the 80s, so you've seen the profession evolve over a long period. Have we moved in the right direction? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the thing is that, basically it boils down to this. Never before have we had so much regulation, so much IFRS, so much laws, so much compliance, okay? And corporate trust is the lowest it's ever been. I don't know if you heard about this major scandal that's just blown out at PwC in Australia. And, it's just a never-ending sort of story of unethical behavior, maybe. And I think it's got worse. And I think especially in this country, I think it does rub off a little bit where crime does pay. I think to some degree that's affected. But rather than going that, I do think the profession has failed to account for itself. I certainly believe, by picking up a set of financial statements today, I don't think that I can believe that, the financial statement, notwithstanding one of the big four, signed off the balance sheet. So, and I think there's a similar feeling around it. There is a lot of uncertainty and distrust in financial information today. And when one reverts back to the Steinhoff scenario, which is the one that I use quite a lot, because Marcus Just was on our board, so I know him personally. And actually, while he was sort of going through this phase, I was working with him. So I find it very interesting. And some of the things that come out of there, they're really disturbing. I mean, firstly, the fact is he's walking around, nothing's happened to him. But secondly, the board of directors, okay, all of who are senior business people in this country, really have taken no responsibility for this whole scenario. And surely somebody has got to be accountable. And if it's not them, who is? Okay. So they've just said, oh, well, we trusted him, and we had a... And these are the kind of things that I find very, very disturbing. And I'm not too sure whether we're addressing it. I think that that ESG, this whole concept of integrated thinking, whereby governance and sort of some new capitals are emerging, and transparency and ethics is a sort of a major part of it. But I kind of also have a sense it's like having the fox guarding the hen house in a way. Okay, because you've got these senior directors all sort of in the same space to some degree. I'm not too sure, and I'm going to make these statements. I mean, I don't have any categorical evidence, but I can tell you one thing, okay, that I find it very difficult to trust these days when I see banks making these huge profits. I wondered to myself, how can it be so? Not to say that they're doing anything wrong, I'm not saying that. But, I question everything. I look more closely at everything. Okay. And I think, again, referring back to Steinhoff, had they look at the balance sheet closer, especially the cash flow statement, they would have picked up some of these shenanigans going on. And, so you asked my question, do you think that the audit profession has improved itself? In fact, I do not believe so at all. I think it's gone backwards.
Well, I suppose more the accounting profession as a whole, not necessarily just the audit profession.
Yeah, well, the accounting profession, I still think was I need to just clarify that. The accounting profession I'm going to be talking about is the CASA brand, okay? Because that's what I believe is on the table. I still am of the view that it is the best, okay, a ground qualification into the business world, bar none in the entire world. Okay? When a person walks out of with a CA, from Psycho, especially they've come out of the Big Four. Okay, they're a person who, firstly, very analytical, but more importantly, they have a lateral thinking capacity. When I don't know if you found it in the boardroom, but I certainly did, is that I remember one of my lecturers was saying to me, one of the board courses I did, he said, this course is all about breaking down the walls between the various subjects. Okay? When you walk into the first exam, you can get anything. Okay, so you need to be prepared for it, and that's how we approach it, and that's how I see it. It really gives a lateral view on the financial function, which I think is incredibly valuable. Okay, it's incredibly valuable. So as a qualification, I still think it's one of the best in the world. And I say this also because I have clients all over the world. I focus on CASs, incidentally, all over the world. And I hear from them, how different the qualifications are there locally in terms of analytics and, again, the lateral thinking part of it, not necessarily the work itself. So, so you've got a great believer in the brand. Okay, I also need to say I'm not too sure what that's going to look like going forward. I'm a little concerned that maybe we might be left in a state of obsolescence, maybe.
But let's talk about that. So
the disruptions that are going on, with AI, in my view, I think that's COVID. Everyone came. There was this new expression that came out during COVID, which was the new normal. Okay. As far as I'm concerned, there's actually nothing normal about the new. I mean, the COVID is the big bad wolf, but it also introduced something quite miraculous, and that was that the whole world went digital. Okay, and it was one of the biggest barriers, I think, before the so-called fourth industrial revolution was going to arrive on our doorstep, simply because we weren't really in that sort of digital space. And we were all, in fact, including myself, kicking and screaming, dragged into the space. Okay, only to find that it actually was a lot more efficient than we ever thought it was. And certainly, had a great deal of potential. So the whole way of doing business, being at meetings, being in the workplace, even a sales presentation or a learning experience, it's all changed dramatically. And that's opened up the door. The fourth industrial revolution is trundling down on us. And why is it so important? There are 15 converging, mind-blowing technologies coming through all at the same time. 11 which affect the business space directly. So if it's not blockchain, and if it's not cryptos, and if it's not artificial intelligence, and if it's not virtual reality of some sort, or 3D printing, it's coming as, quantum computing in itself is a mind-blowing development in what can, in what's going to happen with computers going forward. Albeit that at this particular point in time, it's still very much in its infancy. But we're going into a wild world, and AI in particular. I'm sure you've had some taste of it with ChatGPT, which everyone's talking about at the moment. It's quite remarkable. But it's really, it reminds me of the Commodore 64 computer when it first came out. It was a tape machine with 64 kilobytes of memory. Okay. And to what it sort of morphed into. And I think that artificial intelligence is going to do the same. And in the process, I'm of the view that because the audit process, in other words, the independency that is required in terms of assessing financial statements, I think it's going to be, it's going to land up in the AI space, and very efficiently. That maybe a minute after your financial year end, 1 minute past 12, your glossies are out, fully signed by everyone. And you can be sure that they're accurate because nobody can actually interfere with the auditing process. So, and that has a huge implication on our business, okay, needless to say. And the other thing is that sort of levels, most of the levels below the CFO and maybe one level below, okay, grunt work stuff, okay, which a lot of us are involved in, okay, it's going to be automated, okay. And the reason it's going to be automated, because if you don't do it, and your competitors are doing it, are you going to be left in the dust? Because it is going to save costs, is no idea. And we as CAs are going to need to morph into something different. I believe that the CA should be at the forefront of the digital revolution. And I say that because digitalization is really, it's an efficiency concept in business. And ultimately, the idea is to improve forecasting, okay, dramatically. Now we're talking about big data. Improve margins, okay, improve the management of margins, daily basis and hourly basis. Okay, improve efficiencies, which I don't think the biggest thing is bringing costs down. I think the other two are much bigger. Okay, and also improving service delivery. And these are all business concepts. They're not IT concepts, okay? And I think the CA can fit very nicely into that space. If, you choose to step up into that space, because if not, somebody else is going to take it from us. And the other thing which I think is very relevant and is ESG. And ESG is quite an interesting idea because it's really swung the whole paradigm in business around completely. So where before, it was profit and dividends for the shareholders, okay, it's now a much, much bigger game. And instead of profits and dividends, it's really about long-term sustainable value creation. Okay? And that in itself is another thing completely, because it kind of puts this year's profits on the back burner and tomorrow's value creation very much on the front, which means maybe that the integrated report is going to become the most important document, okay, which is a forward projection document. And the historical stuff will end up on the back page, okay. That's not going to be as important as sort of the integrated report. The only thing that comes up for me around it, and we're having this problem at the moment, I don't know how it's going to be resolved, is how is it going to be assured? Who's actually going to assure this? Because, as I say, with corporate trust, it's supposed
to assure forecasts. I agree.
How do you assure this stuff? How do you, how do you? So it is a problem. Now that the profession itself is struggling with this, but it's interesting also to note that we're sitting on the forefront of these ideas. I mean, Professor Mervyn King is probably the top guy in the world today. He comes from us, and he's very, very passionate about it. And it's great to listen to him talk about it because he really gets the message across very clear.
Okay. I want to put opinion in that quickly, just for because I just want to get to some of my other questions. Just for the audience, if we'll be responding to questions towards the end, so please add your questions to the comment section now so that we don't miss them. Just to change tack a little bit from to specifically to your coaching part. As a coach of executives and future executives or people wanting to grow, what is the most common issue that you see in your clients that keeps coming up that you have to solve?
Well, ultimately, I think it's about confidence. Okay, and again, I break it down into really a simple, issue is that there is a big difference between executives and managers. It's a big jump. It's a big gap. And that's largely, there's a strange dynamic that I believe is very, it's there, but it's not as easily apparent. Is that there's a certain type of personality that naturally bubbles up into the executive space. So I want to better way to call them Mimi type people. Some people would want to call them narcissists, but they are a particular kind of personality, okay, that is different to, the sort of run-of-the-mill type person, okay. So they tend to be a little bit more guarded. They tend to be very tactical, very cunning, okay. And sometimes I think maybe even they bend the rules. But I mean, it's it really is getting to the top. I'm not saying it's necessarily dog eat dog. I think it's much more subtle than that. By the way, I think it ultimately is about that, but it's much, much more subtle. And learning and understanding this is very, very important because one's lack of confidence might be because one is actually working with or working for such a personality. And in my coaching program, I build this in as actually quite an important part of it. Okay, is that once you begin to understand this and you know how to play this particular situation to your advantage, okay, things begin to change quite dramatically. What I find with my clients is they really begin to find their confidence, okay, and that makes a massive difference. And that really makes a massive difference. I mean, talking about mainly CEOs, when these guys are all trained to be executives. I mean, they're trained to be technically, skillfully in the executive space. So, once they get they're able to do this. So to answer your question, that's the sort of main focus of the work that I do, is showing guys, through a process, how to sort of position themselves. And the strategy is very simple. okay, is to become second in charge to the executive you report to, and that really requires stepping up and claiming that space, because you can only learn to be an executive from another executive. And that's because about 50% of the space is political, okay, and one needs to understand the inner workings of the politics, because a lot of decisions are made based on political dynamics, okay, and I'm not talking country politics, and one needs to understand those issues. So there are a couple of things that one has to do in order to position oneself, and one of them is to take one step removed from one's own personnel, one's own staff, because you will not be trusted with confidential information if you are too close to people that you work with. So there's a sort of a dynamic that comes in there. Being aware of one's brand, what sort of message is one putting out there? Is one putting an executive message out? Understanding the protocols in the softer skills, real focus on value add. I mean, if you're not adding value, you're not in the executive space. Executives add value. And then sort of, some skills around networking, which really is all about, getting into your boss's network, actually. Not your network. It's actually define your way into your boss's network. And that's ultimately the strategy that's followed. So, yeah.
Makes sense. And are there any misconceptions that many people have about the executive space when they come to you?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I find with guys is this whole concept of wanting to be in the strategical space. Okay, and I always sort of wondered to myself and always ask the question: what does strategy actually mean? And I want to be in the strategic space. I'm sick of where I want to be. Okay, it's not as simple that it's the idea of strategy is a very broad concept. It basically, nice definition I know who it was. It's the actions a business needs to take to thrive into the future. Okay, which is a nice broad statement, but that sits firmly in the hands of the CEO. The CEO is accountable for strategy. Okay, the C-suite executives, okay, are responsible for executing on the strategy, probably formulating the plan, the strategic plan, but critically around executing the strategy, and managers implement. And I ask my clients always, are you implementing or are you executing on strategy? And of course, that is the big decider, because the implementer, it's really the same thing. Executives focus on doing the right things, managers focus on doing things right. The same idea. Managers focus on executives focus on effectiveness, managers focus on efficiency. It's saying the same thing. So, so other than that, so I think probably there is a kind of a misconception of what the executive space actually looks like. And once we sort of move through the process, it becomes a lot clearer, and sort of guys can begin to see where they need to put their feet in order to make the move.
And so moving the executive space to somebody who's maybe trying to get a coach or thinking about getting a coach. I have a coach that I work with, but I found the process of finding a coach that I resonate with very difficult. That the whole process of finding a coach was very difficult, finding someone that I resonate with. What advice do you have for someone who's looking for the right coach for them?
Yeah, I suppose, I think that word of mouth is very important. Okay. And also getting some external verification about the person. So, for instance, maybe there's some recommendations on LinkedIn, maybe even, but asking around is always the best way of doing it, because coaches are very different. And ultimately, finding the right coach for yourself, again, you've got to be able to resonate with the coach. You've got to be able to. And, that's the one thing that's very important to me. And I have a free session, our session with my client, the prospective client, to see whether they resonate with me. Sometimes they don't. Okay. Sometimes I don't, and then I don't offer them my program. But I think it is difficult. And my view is that it's very important to get some sort of reference on a coach before you start with them. Okay. Also, you can actually maybe, I don't know if I don't know, this is a difficult one. If you're dealing with a big coaching group, okay, and they're big players in the market, normally you'll find that they're employing people who they screen properly, I think. I haven't met such people. But I think that's another alternative. And also, I suppose you want some sort of comeback. If it goes wrong, that you can, there's some sort of comeback. And being a small operation like myself that is probably one of the disadvantages. Although I do offer a money back guarantee on the work that I do. If you don't get any value from the program, you get your money back. No questions asked, and it's your call. And I'm only able to do that because I really screen my clients carefully before I take them on. So when I take on a client, I know that I can help him. I can see the problems that are going on. So I think one of the things, I think that working on price is not a clever thing to do. That goedkoop is deurkoop, as they say. And when it comes to coaching, one wants to be sure. And by the way, there's also this: you step up. I don't believe one should have one coach. I mean, you work with a coach. Okay, you've done the pro. You're done. It's a good idea to step up to another coach who's actually maybe at a different level. I think that's very, very relevant in the whole situation. I really encourage my clients to do that because you can only grow by the levels that you're operating at. So it's good to have, is to always be looking for another coach if you've worked with someone for a while.
That's great advice. I don't see any questions coming through, so I think we've answered all the questions in our discussion. Any last few words from you? Anything we didn't discuss that you'd like the audience to know?
Yeah, I think one of the other things is I don't know if anybody's been thinking of getting into the coaching business. I do have people that I can just feel that they have the ability, and because coaching is a calling, there's no doubt about it. Okay, and it is a really exciting business. It is a business that is really taking off. It's it hasn't really grown to the degree that it could. And I, if anyone's interested in coaching, of course they can go into certainly contact. But in the process of my own journey, I've also developed other products, okay, that are around it, and one of them happens to be an entrepreneurial product, which is really about my own journey. What did it take to start a business? What do you need to do? How do you need to think it through before you even step out the door? So while you're still working, okay, can you actually do quite a lot of the groundwork? And so when you move out of there, you've got some cash flow coming in. So I've developed a program around that, which has been my own journey. Okay, and people find that actually quite stimulating. And again, I think I'm ultimately of the view is that employment is no longer a secure option. Okay, and that it's probably better that one is in some way, in one's own business. Especially if you can be in a virtual office and be in the virtual space that you don't actually have to be present. You could actually be sitting here and actually operating anywhere in the world. So, I like that part of it, and so that's another part of the kind of work that I do. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a great way to end. The show has been live on YouTube and should be available on podcast by tomorrow. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast and you feel that it's added value, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on that notification bell to get automatically notified when the next episode comes out. Clive, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on your show. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us for another episode of Tooways to Skin a Cat. Goodbye.